Breaking the chain, winter weather, winter aviation weather, and this is an all-American aviation production. Welcome tonight. My name is Jeremy Walters. This is a presentation brought to you by All-American Aviation. I am an ATP, fly Hawkers, three King Airs, various types of helicopters and airplanes. Just recently got my Master CFI designation. Major in the United States Army Reserve. And as I mentioned, I got the All-American Aviation YouTube channel. I'm a content creator. Just got started up doing YouTube videos about 2 years ago. It's slowly starting to come together. And filmmaking is something that I'm working my way into slowly but surely. And this presentation, Breaking the Chain, is part of a sub-series of the All-American Aviation channel. I flew AH-64 Apache helicopters when I was in the Army. And I also really love teaching airplanes. Any kind of airplane, helicopter, I try to get my hands on. I really love to teach. And there's a picture of me chilling out on Lake Buchanan, Texas in a PA-12 on whip lines, having a ball with a student. I couldn't do any of this without the wonderful support of my family. It's myself and 6 other people in our house, family of 7, 5 kids aging from 17 months to 12 years of age. And then that's my airplane, Miss Betsy Blue, in the background, 1946 Luscombe 8E. Okay, I could not do this presentation without the assistance of my humor and comic relief, Mr. Paul Nadeau. Paul is a instrument-rated private pilot, and he works for VMware, and he has been part of all but 3 of the 21 episodes of Breaking the Chain on the webinar format. And Paul was also is also a veteran of the United States Navy, and he's still aching over this past weekend's loss, Navy 0, Army 15, just to rub it in again.
So before you go forward with that, Jeremy, you do know that there was 116 games total in history, of which the Navy won 60 and Army won 49. So we're just letting you guys get caught up.
What we're talking about is now, right now, because 2020 has been a weird year to start with. And so the Army took it.
Got it.
Sorry. All right. Tonight we have, once again, by popular demand, JP Dice. JP is an innovator in broadcast meteorology. In 2004, he led the development of the first dual polarization Doppler radar used in broadcast meteorology. This is now the standard of all National Weather Service radars. JP was also the first meteorologist in Alabama to earn the certified broadcast meteorologist seal from the American Meteorological Society. He also carries the National Weather Association seal of approval. Dice is the National Weather Association broadcast chair. JP also holds an airline transport pilot rating and is a CFI. When he is not at work, he and his wife enjoy traveling in their Moonies. He's got a beautiful Mooney, Juliet model Mooney. And one of the most thrilling things that he's gotten to do in aviation thus far, besides some of the chit chat that we've had about teaching students in the background and on the phone and various other times, is he got to fly with the U.S. Navy Blue Angels in the F-18 Hornet, which I flying in the Hornet had to be awesome. And so that right there is really amazing. And that's really cool. JP also has his own YouTube channel. It's called Beyond the Briefing. He started it up not long ago, and he goes on and has discussions just like this and talks about weather broadcasting. Go give him a subscribe and check his content out. So at this time, I'm going to pass the flight controls off to, once again, JP Dice. JP, you have the flight controls, and welcome back, good sir.
All right, thank you very much, Jeremy. I have the controls, and we're going to share my screen here and get right to it. All right, I've got my PowerPoint up, and we'll go ahead and play that. As these guys have told you, I am JP, and I am coming to you from the wonderful studios of WBRC in Birmingham. We're the Fox affiliate here in Birmingham, Alabama. So I jokingly said, probably one of the few presenters that actually does the presentation from a bona fide television studio and a weather center. So that's kind of cool. We're going to talk about winter weather flying tonight, and we're going to talk about some of the hazards. There's actually some benefits to flying this time of the year. Interesting, before we get started, we have some pretty significant winter weather happening across the country this week. Kansas and Oklahoma with snow, and we got a big nor'easter that is moving into the Northeast that is going to be really crippling for a lot of travel over the next couple of days. All right, off the top, 75% of weather-related aviation accidents are deadly, and that comes from the NTSB. And that's really one of my inspirations for doing these presentations. You look at those NTSB reports, and you keep reading people doing some things they shouldn't be doing and getting themselves into situations that are oftentimes fatal. So what I'm aiming to do is provide you with some information to help you make better decisions, understand the data better, to flight plan better, and maybe make those go and no-go decisions. So why so many weather-related accidents? You know, this could really apply not only to winter weather flying, but this can apply to thunderstorms, various types of weather. Get there-itis. I have to get there because I got to be at work. I have a meeting. I need to be at some event. The external pressure. We know when we're learning about external pressures, when you're using the PAVE acronym that we teach in flight instructing. I have done it before and survived. I've seen people that they've flown into bad weather before and they're like, well, that wasn't so bad. We can do that again. When in fact, the time that they did it, they probably got lucky and ended up making it through. So it gives them a false sense of security. Not realizing the limitations of data. You know, it's easy to say, you know, this person, man, they're just stupid or they're an idiot or whatever as we play armchair quarterback. But sometimes I honestly think people don't understand what they're looking at, and they're making decisions because they don't know what they're looking at. Not having a backup or escape plan. I tell you what, whenever I do anything with an airplane, I have myself a backup or escape plan just in case the weather doesn't work out as forecast. You know, weather is one of those things, as good as weather forecasting is, we are predicting the future. Anytime you're predicting the future, there is some level of uncertainty. Think about, you know, predicting the score of that Army-Navy game, predicting the stock market, predicting the economy, predicting the weather. There's going to be, as good as we are, and the data is so good, and the skill that we've developed, there is still uncertainty anytime you predict the future. And the farther out you go, the less accurate it's going to be. And for some, it's, I don't know what I don't know. You think you know something, but you really don't know it because of limitations in your education with it or experience. And I've run into that before with students or newly minted students. All right, advantages of cool season flying. Before we get into all the bad stuff that can happen, let's talk about some of the advantages. I was out with a student today and we were doing check ride prep, and I said, you know what, it's pretty nice out here. We're not sweating in this airplane. It's pretty comfortable. That's one of the advantages, right? If you don't have an air-conditioned airplane, it's nice to be in a cockpit where you're not flying around or taxiing around and it's 95 degrees or more. Better aircraft performance based on that lower density altitude. Getting those density altitudes that are in the negative value, that airplane leaps off the ground. Many cases, the ride is smoother for the pilots and passengers. And you can, at times, take advantage of some strong tailwinds this time of the year because of the position of the jet stream. And you can also have some disadvantages with the headwinds, just depends. Cooler temperatures on the ground, as I mentioned, more comfortable for airplanes that don't have air conditioning for those passengers. Disadvantages of cool season flying, more IFR days. Man, around here in the Birmingham area, lots of low overcast. I was working here at the TV station Saturday night. Fog starts developing. We're 100 foot vertical visibility and a quarter mile horizontal visibility. So 100-foot ceiling. I mean, we're talking about below IFR or ILS minimums, really low overcast. Airframe icing. You do, despite it still being a cool season, you can have thunderstorms and severe weather. You have some pretty potent cold fronts that come through this time of the year, and frozen precipitation, sleet, any kind of, we can have even hail in the wintertime, snow, of course, the most common kind of frozen precipitation. How do I manage risk? All right, this is where we come in. This is where this presentation comes in. Being weather aware, and that includes a weather briefing, that includes the FISB or Sirius XM weather data, METARs and TAFs, model data, weather apps, watching the weather on TV to get kind of an overall view of how the weather is going to be. It's not a bad idea. If you plan a trip on a Friday and it's a Tuesday, turn the TV on, see what the local meteorologist is calling for in your area, and just kind of give you an idea. Is it going to be rainy? Is it going to be particularly cold that day? Aircraft, anti-ice and de-ice system, know the difference. Most of us, even the least expensive aircraft, have some kind of anti-ice system. Most of your general aviation training aircraft do not have de-ice systems. TKS, do you have boots, heated wings, pitot heat, AOA, angle of attack, anti-ice? Know the limitations of all those systems. Remember, TKS, great system, but it's finite. You can run out of that fluid. Boots can be overwhelmed. Heated wings are really the most effective. That's something that you find in turbine aircraft. You don't got to find heated wings on a piston airplane. What's your experience in cool season flying? Are you new to the area? Is this something that you don't do a lot? Experience is going to make a big difference in how you mitigate those risks. And an escape plan. What is my plan if things don't go as planned? Where am I going to head? What's my get out of jail free card? Am I going to turn around and go back? Am I going to change altitudes? Have that plan to get you to a safe spot. All right, what's MOS data? Last time I think we were here, we talked a little bit about this. We're going to get more in depth with this here today. MOS data is model output statistics. And it's available now on, if you use ForeFlight, you can click on MOS there. And some people like looking at that because it goes out much farther than the TAFs do in time. But the deal is MOS data is raw data. It's coming straight from a computer model. No human hands have touched MOS data. Use it with a grain of salt because it's going to not be as accurate as the TAFs. Sure, you can look at a couple of days from now. It might give you an idea, but don't base your decision. For example, if you're leaving tomorrow morning, don't look at the MOS for those go and no-go decisions. Look at the TAF. The TAF is put together by your local National Weather Service office. There's meteorologists that are working in there, and they're working at the aviation desk, and they're actually developing those TAFs. The TAF is a much more reliable source, so just remember that. Something else is now available, and I love this. It's available. It's always been available on the internet that you can look at, but it is available on ForeFlight and I believe Garmin Pilot as well. It's the forecast discussion. Make a habit of reading the forecast discussion prior to your departure and read it for your departure and for your destination. Look at the National Weather Service office. If you're flying down to Tampa, Florida, look at the Weather Service office in Ruskin, Florida. Read their discussion. This will give you an idea of what the meteorologists at the local Weather Service office are thinking. This goes kind of behind the forecast, how they develop that TAF, what they're looking at developing, or some changes that could happen. It really puts you in the mind of the meteorologist that's writing the forecast. So read that. Some of it you may not understand all of it. Some of it you will. They used to be much more complicated in their writing than they are now. It's written in plain English, but again, there's going to be some terminology that you may or may not understand. If you're a weather geek, you're going to understand it. Meteorologist, obviously, you're going to know what they're talking about. Data link weather. Most of us have that. If you don't have it, get it. Don't leave home without it. Remember the old American Express card commercial? Don't leave home without. Don't leave home without your weather data. It's a fantastic tool, but it does have limitations. The limitations are delay and resolution. Delay, the time from when the data is created to when it gets to you. There can be a delay with that. Various reasons. We'll talk about some of that in just a little bit. The resolution is going to be lower in the cockpit, and that's because of bandwidth issues. All right, and we're not talking about airplanes that have their own onboard radar. We're talking about the data link weather. If you look at the radar that we show on television, it's going to appear to be a higher resolution most of the time than the data link weather. This is composite data. It is not going to be the single site NEXRAD data that you're going to have in the cockpit. The radar data age can range between 5 and 20 minutes, and that's because of radar volume scans, processing, and transmission. Where does the radar data come from? It comes from the network of WSR 88D Doppler radars, otherwise known as NEXRAD radars. Those are your National Weather Service radars. The data can be as old as 20 minutes. Most of the time, it's going to average about 5 to 8 minutes. And again, stressing the bandwidth limits the data resolution. And that makes it more difficult to use this data to fly around and look at the data for tactical weather avoidance. It's just not going to be there for that. It's more of a strategic planning tool. How does a volume scan work? What you're looking at there, that's the National Weather Service radar. All the radars that are operated by the Weather Service, or they're operated by the DoD, Department of Defense. Some of these NEXRAD radars are actually operated by Air Force Base or Army Base. How does the NEXRAD volume scan work? The volume scan, it starts at the bottom, and that antenna tilts up about 14 levels up there, and then comes back down to the bottom, and that creates the product. That creates the volumetric scan of the data. The composite kind of adds all that up. The single site radar data that you get on your phone, maybe using an app like a Radar Scope, is going to be the lowest elevation. So keep that in mind. This volume scan is what slows things down. It gives you a lot more data, but it does take a little time to produce that. During a normal volume scan, it's about a 5-minute process. You can get that down to less than 90 seconds during a severe weather mode. They change modes on the radar, and it actually scans a lot faster. So yeah, I know I'm talking about winter weather, but believe it or not, there's severe weather during the wintertime months. I can't tell you how many times as a meteorologist I have covered severe thunderstorm outbreaks, tornado outbreaks during the cool season. In fact, a couple of nights ago, we had an EF0 tornado that came through here during the overnight hours, and it really was not an unstable night. It was fairly cool, but you can have that kind of weather this time of the year. One of the things I encourage people to look at when you're trying to figure out where you're going to have the bad weather set up is the Storm Prediction Center, the SPC outlooks. You can see those SPC outlooks when you get on ForeFlight and you go to the images section, and they have a day 1 and a day 2 and a day 3. You have high risk, you have enhanced risk, you have moderate risk, you have marginal risk for severe weather. Marginal is the lowest level, slight is a little higher, enhanced is higher than that, moderate is higher than that, then obviously high risk. In the case here across Indiana and Illinois, part of Ohio and Michigan, that's where you would have significant tornado weather. Even marginal risk, which is kind of a low-end severe weather risk, that is something that you would not want to deal with a general aviation airplane. In most cases, turboprop turbine airplane can get above that kind of weather. So this is a QLCS. Back in the day, they called it a squall line. Quasi-linear convective system. And it's really a line of storms ahead of a cold front. This is what develops when you have that boundary between warm air and cold air. Now keep in mind, warm air and cold air, that doesn't create tornadoes, but the leading edge of that oftentimes is where you're going to have a line of storms. So remember back when we're getting our private pilot rating, what kind of weather typically, what kind of front produces the strongest line of storms, and that's going to be a cold front. So that's what we see. That's one of those deals, if you can't get on top of it, you certainly can't go through it. You cannot penetrate this safely, not going to happen. If you're in an airplane, you can get up 35, 40,000 feet. You can probably get on top of it. It's going to be a bumpy ride, but you can cross that if you can get up high enough. Characteristics of a QLCS found along and ahead of a cold front: intense precipitation, severe winds and lightning. Some cases, you may even have some embedded tornadoes. Wind shear is often found here, intense updrafts, almost impossible to deviate around. Best avoidance is get the airplane on the ground and wait for this thing to pass and then keep going. And what is most commonly thought of during cool season flying is icing. And, you know, icing is one of those things that if it's cold enough, even some fairly low altitudes can give you trouble. And I was working with an instrument student today, and I said, you know, there's times around here you get at 5,000, 6,000 feet, and you're going to be looking at a freezing layer that low. And if you're in an airplane that doesn't have ice protection, or you have to stay down in that for a length of time, that's going to cause problems. Adverse effects of icing to flight: decreased lift, increased weight, reduced thrust, and increased drag. None of which is going to be anything that is conducive to increasing aircraft performance. So you add all these things up, and it can put you in a bad way where the airplane ultimately will get to a point it's not going to be able to fly anymore. Number of different types of icing. You know, the one kind of icing that I always forget about, and I don't even have it in this presentation, technically frost is icing. And we go with the clean wing concept. You have frost on the airplane. Don't go out and fly the airplane with frost on the wing. Make sure all that's gone. Put the plane out in the sun somewhere, sweep it off. Don't fly with frost on the wing. But here's the biggies. Clear icing. It's clear, smooth, and glossy. The favorable conditions for clear icing, and this is sometimes hard to see: large droplets and cumuliform clouds, freezing rain, or terrain effects can cause this clear ice. And there's an example on the screen. Rime icing, this is the rough stuff. Small supercooled droplets and stratiform clouds. It's rough and coarse. There it is on the left-hand side on the nose cone of that aircraft. And then you have the mixed icing. Large and small droplets coexist. Liquid and frozen particles coexist. Wet snow, and you can see some of it there on the leading edge of that wing. So those are your three different types of icing. And the number one place, and many of you know this, that you're going to get the icing first, and it's the part that's hard to see, that's the tail of the airplane. So we talk sometimes about those super cooled droplets, and this is a neat little example here. So you already have a cold surface, and you put liquid water. You put liquid water, not ice, and you pour it on an already cold surface. The ice in this particular example really represents the airframe. The airframe's already below freezing, and you can, based on the atmospheric pressures, still actually have liquid water below freezing. I know it goes against conventional wisdom, but you can, trust me on this. With those super cool droplets, as soon as that liquid hits the cold airframe that is below freezing, look at the significant amount of ice buildup. It could completely overwhelm an icing de-ice system on the airplane. So where are these little evil, super cool large droplets found? They can be found throughout the entire depth of the cloud, but they have kind of a sweet spot too. They're more likely to occur with relatively warm, low altitude clouds. And if you're just kind of looking for an altitude between about 6,000 and 10,000 feet, that's kind of the sweet spot. If you see cloud tops about 12,000 feet with temperatures warmer than -12, you're probably going to have some of those super cool drops in there. And you can look at this data with your data link weather. You can also look at it in ForeFlight. You can look at some of those images where the freezing level is. So where does most icing occur? Not necessarily the super cool drops, but where does most of the icing occur? And that's between freezing and -20 degrees Celsius. Any colder than that, you really start running out of moisture. You get to the point that you don't have any more visible moisture. It's going to be 0 to -20, usually found in the mid-levels of the clouds. For folks that are turboprop or turbine drivers, you're seeing this during a transition period. You're climbing through something or descending through something. You're typically not staying in it. Sometimes you can, but most of the time not. For the piston folks, you may find yourself having to live in this for a little while. And if you don't have ice protection, that's not a good place to be. Even with ice protection, I fly a PA-46 quite a bit, a Mirage or M350, and it does have the boots and it's got the heated prop and heated windshield, but that's still not a place I'm going to want to stay for a long period of time. Where do you get all your weather information from? Man, oh man, there's so many different places that you can get weather information these days. Tried and true Aviation Weather Center. There's you can look up forecast icing, freezing level. Let me talk a little bit about freezing level. Freezing level, if you look at that map, that is the lowest level that you're actually going to see freezing. So if the freezing level is 5,000 feet, that means at 5,000 feet, you're going to have temperatures at freezing. Does that mean you can't fly in it? If it's clear, it's fine. If it is visible moisture, cloud cover, overcast, you're going to be in that for any period of time. That's where the problem is. If it's a clear day, you know, it could be minus 20 and that's fine. It's when you have the visible moisture. So just keep that in mind. Forecast icing, really cool data there, shows where that icing or even those super cool droplets are going to be. So you can click under the forecast section right there. I'm kind of circling, and that's where you're going to find that information. The PIREPs are also very important. Getting those pilot reports, and make sure you're looking at what kind of aircraft it comes from. What may be light icing for a 737 or a 777 is going to be severe icing for a Cirrus or some other GA aircraft. In this particular map that we're showing here, for sake of example, we are showing in the hatched area, I'm just moving my cursor here, this is where the supercooled large droplets are. That's where the worst of it is, all right? And what you're looking at is 1,000 feet MSL, the flight level 300. So 1,000 feet all the way up to 30,000 feet. This is where you're going to have the worst icing, the maximum severity of icing. This is not for today. This is just a generic graphic that I use for sake of example. Avoiding ice with data link. Okay, look at the cloud tops. You can look at the icing layers. You can look at, and one of the advantages here with SiriusXM, if you're using that data compared with ADS-B, they're going to give you those icing layers in 3,000 foot increments, and they're going to give you the tops of those clouds. That's going to be based from observed data, not forecast data. So cloud tops from the observed data. So if the forecast is not right, it's going to correct that with the SiriusXM. So there's some advantages. You know, the disadvantage is you got to pay for that data. The FISB or ADS-B data is free. And don't get me wrong, that's better than nothing. And that's fantastic data. But if you can, you know, it's nice to have the value added products with that. Situational awareness is the key. Do you check the weather days in advance? I'm telling you, when I go anywhere, I am looking at the weather days in advance, kind of formulating a game plan in my head. Multiple sources of weather data. Make sure that you have a a good radar app on your phone. I love Radar Scope. Works well on the iPad, iPhone, Android. It's great to look at that single site radar data when you're on the ground. You can always look at the radar that is closest to where the weather's happening. Do you continue to check the weather? Now, remember, weather can spoil very quickly. It can get old. So even as you're flying, constantly be checking that weather because things could be changing, could be improving, could be getting worse. Is the weather behaving as forecast? If it's not, be ready for that escape plan that we talked about. Have yourself an escape plan. And are you listening to other pilots and ATC reports? You can get a lot of clues just listening on the radio. Are pilots able to get through a certain area? Are they reporting icing? What are the cloud tops? What are the cloud bases? A lot of information, just being a good listener there to ATC and hearing those conversations between air traffic control and other aircraft. All right, this is a neat graphic. I love these things. These are called SKUTs. This is a virtual SKUT. I actually got this from a site that I like to look at. It's called Pivotal Weather. And a virtual SKUT enables you to look into the future. and figure out what the atmosphere is going to look like at noon tomorrow or 3 o'clock tomorrow. Example today, had one of my friends who's doing a trip in a TBM, and he's trying to figure out, hey, am I going to be able to fly this trip? You know, I don't want to be just stuck in the icing the entire time. So I got in there and I looked at the SKU-T based off one of the models that I like to look at, high resolution rapid refresh model. That's some very good high res data. I clicked on the map and I got the SKU-T, the virtual SKU-T. And it shows me where the ice layer is going to be. And you may be wondering, well, how in the world do you figure that out? Well, if you look right here, and I'm just going to move my cursor around, there's the zero, what we call zero isotherm. Everything on the left-hand side of the zero isotherm is below freezing, all right? So right here where I have circled, this is the temperature and the dew point line. They're right there together. So this is visible moisture. So right there in that circled area at that altitude, and I've kind of cut that off on the left-hand side, that's going to be somewhere between about 5,000 and 10,000 feet. We are in visible moisture. You're in the clouds and it is below freezing. So this is a wonderful tool to be able to analyze this data. This is really kind of the back end of how they're doing it with ForeFlight. If you go to that new profile view and it's got that ice layer that you can turn on, that's what they're doing. They're taking the sounding data and drawing that out into a very user-friendly picture. So it will help you in your flight planning. Freezing rain versus sleet. When I started working in TV news, it always bothered me. I'd see a reporter out that'd say, oh, we've got reports of freezing rain. And actually it was sleet. Sleet's the little pellets of ice. And freezing rain is actually liquid. To give you an idea, you could have ice on your airplane without flying through a cloud and it below freezing. Case in point, it's below freezing at the surface, it's raining, it is liquid water, it's rain coming down, but it's below freezing. You take off and that rain freezes on contact with the surface of the airplane or the skin of the airplane because it's a little bit warmer aloft, so it's coming down as liquid, but it's still cold down low, and you could ice up without technically being in a cloud. Interesting, doesn't happen very often, but that's a scenario that can happen. This is the typical freezing rain sounding. So it starts out at snow up at the top. So snow's coming down. There's this little warm layer, and what happens? The snow melts and it rains, and then it moves back down to the left side of that 0 degree isotherm, and then you have the freezing rain. So that's kind of a profile view. This is kind of an elementary drawing. The typical sleet sounding is you start out again as snow. Most of this will start out of snow way up high, and then it starts to melt a little bit, and then it'll freeze back just before it hits the ground and turns into these little sleet pellets. So that's the temperature profile, if you will, between freezing rain and sleet. As I always like to do, I like to go through a few case studies here. And this first one is an airport that is close to where my mom lives. I routinely fly into this airport. And this was a few years ago. And it was around Christmas, December 24th. Cessna 340 was going to take off, a pilot and family, his friends, going to head down to Key West on December 24th, Florida. Shouldn't be any problem, right? Well, terrible visibility. It was pretty much 0-0. In fact, if you read the report, the pilot actually is having a little trouble taxiing the airplane because of being able to see, trying to get out to the runway. So that's some security cam video. The pilot loses control of the aircraft going down the runway due to spatial disorientation during an IMC takeoff. So again, Part 91, hey, you can take off and can't see anything. There's no regulations against that. Is it a good idea? No. Had he waited a little bit, that fog would have lifted and things would have been much better there. But yeah, quickly lost really his senses when going down the runway, and everyone was killed in that crash. And that's one of those things where it's like, just wait just a bit and let this visibility improve. You know, you don't necessarily have to wait for the ceiling to be 1,000 feet or anything like that if you're an instrument pilot, but give it a little bit more. It's really not recommended to take off when you can't see anything. And this one really bothered me a lot. And this was an airplane capable of handling some ice, a TBM 700. and this was up in the Northeast. The icing was really, it was an unforecast severe icing event. And the ice was so severe that the airplane was overwhelmed with ice and got into a stall spin situation. 5 deaths because of this. And again, this is a high performance airplane. This is an airplane that's capable of climbing through ice, but it can be so bad that even an airplane like that, a very nice airplane, cannot handle that. In fact, if you listen to air traffic control on this particular day, you could hear the airliners even talking about having difficulty with this, a lot of ice buildup. So keep that in mind. And what happened, the speed just ended up bleeding off, and this airplane just went into a spin, out of control. Question time. I know I've rattled off a ton of information here. And Paul, I'm going to let you kind of take the controls back. And I know Jeremy's been taking notes as well. Folks that may have some questions for me, I'd love to answer anything that you want to know about weather or icing or data. Glad to do that.
Well, that was another outstanding briefing, JP. I didn't say this in the intro, but winter is next week. We going into winter season.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I thought this would be great timing to have you come on the show and talk about this. I'm going to ask this question. We talked about this behind the scenes, and we both agree with this. Which is more scary to you, flying in icing conditions or a thunderstorm?
Thunderstorms are not nearly as scary. I don't want to be in either one, but I think thunderstorms are easier to avoid. I think icing is one of these things that can be a little sneaky at times. And especially, imagine this, you're flying at night and you got the little ice light on, trying to see if you got any ice buildup out there. And once it goes bad, it can go real bad very quickly. With the thunderstorms, we know they're the big, it's the big T-Rex out there, and we try to stay away from it. Icing is a little bit more covert and stealthy.
Cool. All right. Question from one of the viewers out there. So ForeFlight just released a new update that includes a 10-day forecast. Their question is which weather mode are they using for the 10-day forecast?
Yeah, 10-day forecast. I haven't talked to the ForeFlight folks, but there's only a few ways you can get a 10-day forecast. You're going to have to be either relying on the GFS model, which is the global forecast system, or the European model. I tend to think that's probably more based off the GFS, which is a model we use here in television. I am always a skeptic of anything. Here, I'll give you the behind the scenes. Here's the reason we have 7-day forecasts is not because we are just amazingly good at forecasting out to 7 days. It's because there was a push to always have a weekend in a forecast period. So it was more of almost weather marketing that kind of pushed for that. We're really not exceptionally solid past about 5 days. With a lot of things. Sometimes there's patterns that are easier to predict than others, but when you start getting into those really extended forecasts, you got to take that with a grain of salt, because you're going to be looking at some pretty significant changes, usually toward the end of that forecast period.
Very good. What is FIS? One of the viewers asked.
Oh, FIS. That's the fancy name for the flight information service. There's the FISB is the weather, and the other one is the traffic. It's ADSB is what it is. And some call it FISB, some call it ADSBN. It's the same stuff.
Gotcha. Somebody had asked, and actually I didn't catch it either, where you got the virtual SKU diagrams. Was that something that is available to us as well, or no?
Oh, you bet. That's the nice thing about weather information these days. We have this wonderful weather center here at the TV station, but I would say 90% of the data that we use here is available to the general public. You just need to know how to interpret it. In particular, that virtual SKU that you were talking about comes from a website. It's completely free. It's called pivotalweather.com. If you go to my YouTube channel, I have some tutorials on how you can use this. But again, pivotalweather.com, you click on the best model that you're trying to if you're doing something in the near term, you would use like the high resolution rapid refresh model or the 3-kilometer NAM, one of those higher resolution models. You click on your spot in the map, and it's going to show you that virtual skew T. And it can be, for tonight at midnight, could be tomorrow at 6 a.m. You just kind of pick the time frame that you're looking at, and it's going to give you that data. Also, in addition to the temperatures aloft, where you could have the cloud cover coming together, it also shows you where you're going to have the higher winds and the lower winds and the wind direction, even areas of wind shear.
Excellent. So with the ADSB weather delays, is the age shown on our in-flight displays like ForeFlight or the GNS 530, et cetera, the actual delay or just the delay since our receivers last updated?
That's right. That is not, when it says data age, that is not the complete picture. That data could be because you've also got the processing of the data and the transmission to the aircraft. You could add another 4 or 5 minutes onto that. So I would plan with that. Just keep in the back of your mind when you see that, that's about 10 minutes. If you do that, that's going to give you a nice safety margin. And the problem is 10 minutes, if you've got like a squall line and it is moving at 40 knots and you're flying along at 180 knots, things are going to be in different positions in 10 minutes. With the winter stuff, it's not happening quite as fast unless you have a squall line moving through or something like that. But just as a general rule, this thing, it's probably about 10 minutes old. It's probably not that old, but it could be.
Gotcha. All right. So the next question. So I know you have more degrees than a thermometer. Sorry for the pun on that one. In weather, actually, you do, right? But for those of us who don't have our master's in meteorology, what is a good resource, whether it be educational book, a podcast, an online course, for understanding aviation weather at a higher standard than just your regular basic private?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. There's a number of resources out there, and there is an online resource, and these are free units. It's called the COMET program, and you can write that down, COMET. It's a meteorological education program that you can go on to sign up for these modules. And they have modules on fog, and they have it on numerical weather prediction. They have satellite interpretation. They have radar interpretation, and you can just register on there and you can take these different courses. Some of them are really complex. Others are more of a overview. And I think a lot of folks in aviation would benefit from some of those.
All right, JP, testimony time. Also to the viewers, I dropped JP's YouTube channel link in the chat. Go check his channel out. But JP, do you have any kind of personal testimony of any kind of icing incidents or inadvertent entry into icing?
No, I have been fortunate. I've had icing before, but it's not anything that we didn't expect or we weren't able to handle. And my personal airplane, the M20J, the Mooney, it stays out of anything remotely like that because there's no icing protection at all on that aircraft. So far we've been in good shape, but there's a lot of different stories. I remember a number of years ago, right here in the Birmingham area, there was a Cirrus, I believe a SR-22, that got into some really bad icing, and they survived. They ended up pulling the chute, but it was that bad that the airplane was not controllable. Icing, like I said, it's one of the things that does scare me depending on what kind of airplane I'm flying. And a lot of our GA airplanes, it's just not the place to be.
That actually leads us right into our next question. It is my turn to ask the question, right, Jeremy?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. So next question. What is your personal decision for making go, no-go decisions when it comes to icing for a single engine piston, non-FICI aircraft? So basically, if I wanted to think like JP to be as safe as I possibly could in icing conditions, what would that be?
Yeah, I'm going to look at that freezing level. How low is it? If we're looking at, it's going to be a trip that I'm going to have to make, and there's a good chance of it, I'm going to be in instrument conditions much of the time in IMC, invisible moisture, and that freezing level's down to 4,000 or 5,000 feet, and it is it's a longer trip, I'm probably not going to take that. I'll give you an example. A few years ago, I'm in Birmingham. Huntsville, Alabama is about 80 nautical miles to the north of us. And I flew up there, and the freezing level was pretty darn low. But I didn't get any higher than 4,000 feet. I flew, for an instrument flight, that's pretty low. But the reason I didn't get any higher is because the freezing level was fairly low. So I wouldn't want to fly that low for a long trip if I didn't have to, because fuel consumption and winds and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, if we start looking at 4,000 or 5,000 foot freezing level, I'm starting to really think about that, because it doesn't take a whole lot before you're in that. The other thing you need to consider, what I'm going to do is, how deep is that level of clouds? If it's just a thin layer and I can pop out on top, I'll go ahead and do it. But if we're going to be stuck solid IMC for any length of time, we're not going to do that trip with a freezing level that low. And I know for certain parts of the country, if you don't have an airplane with some kind of ice protection, that takes a lot of flying days out of the equation, because you get up north and there's a lot of those days where you do have low overcast and it may be rather thick and the freezing level pretty low and you just can't go.
Gotcha.
JP, let's just say you do find yourself in invertent icing conditions. What do you recommend that you do?
The recommendations: get out. Number one, I think at first glance, a lot of people think, well, I got to descend. Where really you may be better served climbing. You could have an inversion layer where the temperature actually warms a little bit, or that visible moisture, the cloud that you're in, you may pop out on top. The problem is, if you start going down, you may have so much ice build up. If there's any kind of terrain or obstacle clearance or something like that, you may not be able to get up higher. You may lose the altitude, and that's where you're kind of stuck. So first of all, climb. ATC is a wonderful resource with some of those pilot reports. Listen to ATC. I always kind of paint a mental picture of what's going on around me anyway, just listening to the chatter on the radio, but also query ATC, and don't be afraid to say, here's what I'm in right now, and I need to get out of this. And don't be afraid to use the E word. I mean, if you're in an airplane that doesn't have the protection for it, or you're getting overwhelmed, declare an emergency, and that gives you priority right there. And I think some people are reluctant to do that, and it shouldn't be. But number one, let's try our best to not get into those situations. It can happen because a weather forecast changes. Something is not working out exactly the way you planned. But again, I stress, if you're in an airplane that does not have that capability, it's no place to be.
And that was kind of a lead into what you said. And you said the key ticket item there, having a mental picture, having the SA to avoid the situation altogether. So we've got a lot. You're a meteorologist. You've got multiple degrees, and we just had a nice, outstanding briefing from you. But let's just say I'm a private pilot with an instrument rating, and I haven't looked at the meteorology stuff in quite some time. And we know as instructors that kind of goes out the window if you don't use it due to disuse. So what's a quick down and dirty way to gain a mental picture before I even take off and go from point A to point B of whether I should try to turn around, descend, or climb?
Now, Jeremy, are we on the ground or are we in the air right now?
Just we're on the ground. What are the big ticket items that we need to do to look at?
Yeah, I'm going to walk you through this. What I'd like you to look at, number one, where's your freezing level? How low is it? All right. Look at the pilot reports. What are the pilots reporting, and what kind of aircraft are they coming from? Is it a small airplane? Is it a large jet? If it's as I mentioned in the presentation, if it's a larger airplane with decent icing, de-ice equipment, you need to realize that that's going to be different reported than a Cessna 172 or a Cessna 182. Pilot reports, freezing level, your eyes, look outside, see how the cloud cover looks. Look at radar. What do you have in terms of any kind of rain or freezing rain in your area? If you go to a product like Radar Scope, that's available for your mobile device, or even you can run it on a Mac. Radar Scope will have weather depiction, and that's going to show you the different precip types. It's going to show you if there's mixed precip, if there's snow, if there's liquid rain. So that's going to help you paint that picture of what's going on. Also, look at a synoptic chart. Where are the fronts located? What are the temperatures at the surface? If you do some simple math, you can look at the lapse rates and figure out, gosh, if I climb up to 4,000 feet and it's already 40 degrees here at the surface, it's not going to be long before I'm, talking about being into a freezing layer there. And also a good handle on your airplane. What do I have on this airplane? Yeah, don't forget, pitot heat. A lot of people don't think about that. It's the little thing we don't turn on because it has such a high amperage draw. But if we're going to be flying an IMC, and my rule on that, if it is outside air temperature is 40 degrees, pitot heat's on. Obviously, if you're going to be in a plane that's going to be flying at higher altitudes, it's going to always be on. But just in my Mooney, 40 degrees, pitot heat's on. That's what I would do to paint that mental picture of what's going to happen. Just see what's shaping up with that freezing level, what altitudes that I need to fly for obstacle clearance. Sometimes there's parts of the country, 4,000 feet, and you're going from point A to point B, and you have to stay that low. 4,000 feet is not going to cut it. You're going to run into a mountain range or something with rising terrain. So you need to look at that. Are you going to be able to stay low enough to stay out of that freezing layer?
Awesome. I tell you what, I'm sitting over here taking notes like a college kid.
I am too.
With all the
instructor.
I know, right? Yeah, it's great information, and I know that we do have to let you go here because you actually have to go do your real job here shortly. But quick question. It's actually a good question that I honestly don't know the answer to. Can you get freezing rain without the inversion layer that you were talking about? All the models we see always have an inversion layer.
No. For freezing rain, you have to have that layer of warm air. It starts out as the cold, the snow at the top, and then it's going to melt into that layer of warm air. And then at the surface, you're going to be looking at, you have to have freezing temperatures at the surface to have freezing rain. But freezing rain, where the common mistake is among a lot of people that aren't into weather, that sleet is freezing rain because, hey, it's frozen, right? The freezing rain has to be liquid precipitation that freezes on contact with an object. And we hope that object is not a horizontal stabilizer.
All right, JP. I'm going to ask two questions. One's kind of a long-winded question, and one's a shorter question. And then we're gonna try to move towards letting you get loose here, because I could sit here and ask you a bunch of questions all night. First, what is the ADSB weather coverage?
What is it in terms of geographically, or what data is provided with that?
What data is provided?
Okay. ADSB is, you're going to get your METARs, you're going to get TAPs, you're going to get radar information, you're going to get also you're going to get the winter precipitation, some of the icing levels and things like that available with ADSB. And it depends also in how you're displaying that. What are you looking at that weather data with? Is it on a Garmin 750? Is it on a G1000? Is it on your iPad? A lot of that, the ADSB data is also going to be what kind of display device. And there is actually a list of, if you go to, you can just Google ADSB and data products. There's a list of everything that's available on that. With the Sirius XM, they actually have a few more products available. I call them like value added, where they do some additional processing and some more data goes into that. Obviously, you're paying more for that, but it gives you a little bit better picture of what's happening. There's still the time delays, and there's still the resolution situation. All that's going to be very similar, but you're going to have some value added products. For example, those cloud tops. You're going to be looking at observed cloud tops versus just the forecast cloud tops. But ADSB, whether or not, get your weather data. I've got some students that I have to almost preach to them. Hey, make sure you fly with this stuff all the time. It's not an option. They're in an older airplane that may not have the stuff in the panel. Put your little Stratus box up there, or whatever kind of ADSB in receiver you've got. Put it on there, because you need to be looking at this data all the time.
You're going to kind of wish that you hadn't saved that $30 if you don't have that information in flight, right? When you need it.
That's right. I'm so bad. I've got ADS-B and Sirius XM in my airplane. I've got a 796 over here, and then I've got my Avidyne, and I've got my Aspens with all the ADS-B stuff. If I could hang a weather radar on a Mooney, I probably would, but we're not going to go that far.
Overgross it.
Exactly.
Well, one last question, and I always ask every viewer, every presenter this, and that is, what is JP's definition of a professional pilot?
A professional pilot is someone who is a good decision maker. I'm convinced that we can almost teach anyone to operate an aircraft, but it is very challenging to teach people to be good decision makers and risk mitigators, and that's what we have to be. If we do that, it's going to make things a lot safer. And also look out for your other pilots. Good airmanship. Coordinate with other folks. Don't cut people off in the pattern. All of those things that sound kind of trivial, but you put all of that together, and that's what makes a professional pilot. You really need, I tell people, if you're flying a Cessna 172, a Piper Cherokee, or a 767, you're still in the airspace system. You're still carrying passengers. You are still going from point A to point B. You need to approach that just like an airline pilot does, with that level of professionalism, because the reason the airlines are so safe is because they have these checks already in place. You do the same, and you're really going to enhance your level of safety, and we can reduce the number of these, unnecessary accidents.
JP, thank you. I can be on, I'll confession time. Weather is probably the least thing I enjoy teaching my students. And I have to constantly go get in the books and refresh my memory whenever I'm training a private pilot or instrument student or whatnot. And, you make this really fun and enjoyable, and you present it in a really excellent manner. And so I just want to say thank you from Paul and I and all the viewers. This is the second time you've been on the show, and what I would really like to do, if you're okay with it, is I'd like to have you come back in the springtime, say March, April timeframe, whenever we start talking about thunderstorm activity, and we can revisit all of the things that we have to be concerned with thunderstorm activity.
Absolutely, love to do it.
So, final word before you get ready for the live broadcast in 30 minutes.
Well, you guys be safe out there, and make sure that you always err on the side of safety. What's always said is, what is that? I would rather be on the ground wishing I was up there than in the air wishing that I was on the ground. And a lot of folks have had those situations. They've lived to tell about them, and they've said, I'm not going to do that again. And there's a few times I have to say, I've even put some things in the, here's what we're not going to do again file. And we learn from that. So be safe out there. And again, learn all you can about weather. There's a vast amount of resources available, and the comment modules, you can always contact me, and I'll be happy to answer questions or direct you in the right place. Watch my YouTube channel. There's some cool information on there where I kind of walk you through some things like those skew tees. Love helping folks, and if we can keep everybody safe, that's awesome.
That's right. I always say, JP, if we can save one person, then we've done our job. All right. Yeah. Well, thanks again, JP.
But you have a Merry Christmas.
Yeah.
You guys too. And thanks for having me on. It means a lot. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you taking the time. So stay safe out in Alabama, and we'll be talking to you.
All right. You guys be safe too. Merry Christmas.
I'm going to go ahead and close us out. All right. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. If you have any questions for me, send me an email at flyallamericans@gmail.com. As I drop the YouTube link for JP's channel in the chat, also go ahead and hit the subscribe button on the All American Aviation channel, because this is where I will dump or upload this presentation to in the next day or so. Also, you can find me on Facebook at All American Aviation and Instagram. This is the 21st webinar or webcast with Breaking the Chain that I've done since we had to cancel a presentation in a live format in person back in March due to COVID. 2020 has been one really interesting year, and this program has been growing, and we've done a lot of amazing things. There's a lot of interesting things that we're doing behind the scenes to help make the aviation community better by safety and building camaraderie. And we're also trying to effort some things to affect some potential policy change. More on that at a later date. I've already mentioned some of that in the past, but I'm not really going to dive into those details tonight. I would like to invite all of you to come back on December 29th as we have an aviation town hall. What we're going to cover is various topics related to all the other webinars that we've had since we went live back in March. We're going to talk about this new COVID-19 vaccine that just got approved. We're going to talk about the Pilots for Ken project with any updates that we have at that point and any other burning questions that are aviation related and how we as pilots can do a better job at staying safe and having a good time. That's really the two important things. We want to stay safe and we want to have fun. So I'm going to leave you guys with this quote from the late General Chuck Yeager, who just passed away last week. Rules are made for people who aren't willing to make up their own. And I think the spirit of that is, if you're a professional, you are going to exercise your own limitations and constraint. From Paul and I, and from the groups that are forming around this country, supporting this program and all the other things that we've got going on, have a wonderful Tuesday evening. Merry Christmas. Fly safe, keep learning, and never give up on a dream. So long.